that I spoke about in the beginning just there, the concept of moral truth. When we look at some of the military conquests of the Old Testament, bear in mind that the promised land pledged to Abraham is not an empty plain. Its indigenous inhabitants had to be, shall we say, displaced by a series of military campaigns ordered by God and carried out by his prophets. Thus we have such commands as in Deuteronomy chapter 20. When you march up to attack a city, make its people an offer of peace. Sounds promising to start with. If they accept and open their gates, all the people in it shall be subject to forced labor and shall work for you. Some peace. If they refuse to make peace and engage you in battle, which, why would they do that on these terms? Lay siege to that city. When the Lord your God delivers it into your hand, put to the sword all the men in it. As for the women, the children, and the livestock, and everything else in the city, they get to go... You may take these as plunder for yourselves, that's right. And you may use the plunder the Lord your God gives you from your enemies. Likewise, in 1 Samuel, we have the destruction of the Amalekites. There's the order, now go attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. I'm told sometimes that this is actually an exercise in hyperbole. God didn't mean everyone. It continues, do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. And if you think that this is hyperbole, consider what happens when Saul does conduct the destruction of the Amalekites as ordered, and decides to leave alive the king as well as some of the best of the livestock. He leaves them alive. For this small act of mercy, God responds by saying to the prophet Samuel, I regret that I have made Saul king because he's turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. So not even the animals can escape this genocide. So I'd like to ask Dinesh, I suppose, directly, which is it? Is this a morally corrupt series of events, or do I have to dispel with my moral intuition that genocide, including of innocent children, is a bad thing? There's plenty more to talk about in that regard. I don't want to take up too much time. This isn't, of course, to mention the advocacy and explicit instructions around slavery in the Old Testament. Hopefully we can get onto those too, if we want to go down the moral path. But I think that the most natural interpretation of the question is the concept of historicity. The literal truth of the Bible, that is. This is where I think we have to move to the New Testament, because the genre of the Gospel seems to be historical biography, unlike the mythology of a book like the Psalms or Genesis or Job.
And Israel is bombing apartment blocks in Beirut, Lebanon. You know what the name of the military operation was? Eternal Darkness. Israel named this operation, killing hundreds of civilians in Lebanon, mostly in Beirut, Eternal Darkness. Because, why even pretend anymore? Eternal darkness, by the way, is mentioned extensively in the New Testament. It's a euphemism for hell. And that's exactly what Israel brought to Christians in Lebanon today. Here's a video of it. Looking a little bit like Gaza. And of course, that's the point of Operation Eternal Darkness. But what does it look like on the ground? Again, these are civilians who were murdered by the Israeli military using American weapons and American tax dollars to do it in order to stop a ceasefire that the American president happily announced to the great relief of the American people. All of it stopped by Operation Eternal Darkness, targeting civilians. But if you were a civilian on the ground in Beirut, what did it look like? Well, we have this video, which is distressing. This is a little Lebanese girl walking out on a sunny day with her father in a residential neighborhood in Beirut when the Israelis come in and level the city. Here's what it looked like. Operation Eternal Darkness. That's for sure. So the net effect was to end the ceasefire. Again, it hasn't been announced, but the Straits of Hormuz are closed once again. Not open, totally closed, apparently. And the Israelis are continuing to blow up Christians, murder Christians, and other civilians in Lebanon. So this afternoon, the administration announced, well, there's been some confusion here. An agreement that Israel would stop destroying Lebanon was not part of the agreement with Iran. And so clearly they thought it was. They thought somehow the United States would get Israel under control as its patron. We never promised to do that. So this was all a mistake, and we'd love to negotiate the terms, but exclusive of Israel's behavior. Israel's going to do what it's going to do. And, they may kill more little girls in Beirut, but that has nothing to do with the bilateral we'd like to have with you. Well, it raises a couple really interesting questions that need to be resolved before we can fix this and fix our country. And the first is, why would you ever go into a war with another country when you don't have aligned interests, when you don't have the same goals? Israel is a whole separate goal from ours. Israel would like to leave Iran a husk, a civil war between various ethnic groups, just a bleeding wound, and therefore permanently weakened. They don't want a coherent nation state in Iran because that wouldn't help them. The United States, of course, doesn't want that because you can't open the Straits of Hormuz unless you have someone in charge of the territory of Iran, because then pirates will close it. Anyone with mines or drones can close the strait. You need a central government in Tehran to keep the strait open. And the United States, being, of course, subject to international commodity prices like everybody else, and with a big economy, doesn't want that. Doesn't want the refugee crisis in Europe and the U.S. that will inevitably result if Israel gets its way. The United States went in there with goals that weren't exactly clear. I don't know, somehow ending the nuclear program because it's such a threat, even though U.S. intelligence had repeatedly concluded that it was not an imminent threat. They didn't have a nuclear weapon. They didn't have ICBMs. Just didn't exist. It's the WMD story from 2002, Redux. But the idea was to apparently brush them back a little bit and let them know that you can't do anything crazy in the region. That's not Israel's goal. So the first mistake was lashing ourselves to another country with separate goals. But more immediately, the mistake would be, if you want to wrap this up with a ceasefire and a peace agreement, you would, of course, tell Israel to get on board, because Israel is a tiny, insignificant country with an infinitesimally small population and economy that only exists because you protect it and pay for everything. Israel is your client state. This is like taking orders from your housekeeper, which you would never do. Why would you do that if you had self-respect? So the first thing you would do if you were sitting down to come to terms with your opponent, this big country, Iran, that you haven't been able to beat militarily, would be to tell Israel, hey, we're suing for peace. We're going to get this done. You knock it off. But the U.S. didn't do that. This administration did not do that. In fact, apparently, according to the Israelis, they never even consulted Benjamin Netanyahu. They did not tell him that we were right on the cusp of ceasefire talks. Why? Because they were worried that he would do what he did with Operation Eternal Darkness, Operation Hell, and scuttle the whole thing by doing something crazy like bombing apartment buildings in Beirut, Lebanon. So apparently, getting Israel under control so the United States could save its economy and the lives of its troops was not even on the table. Like, the one thing we know we're not going to do is tell the Israelis to behave. And that's why there is, in practical terms, in effect, if not name, no ceasefire right now. The one that everybody in the United States desperately wants.